The night I walked into his restaurant, I thought my story was ending. I did not know it was about to begin. Rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows as I pushed open the front door of Callaway House. Warm light spilled across polished hardwood floors. Crystal glasses reflected golden chandeliers overhead. Conversations filled the dining room. Laughter drifted between tables. The entire place felt untouched by the storm outside. For a second, I just stood there. My coat was soaked. My hands trembled. Red stains covered the sleeves of my cream sweater from helping someone after a traffic accident several blocks away. The paramedics had arrived. The injured driver was safe. But I had nowhere else to go afterward. No family nearby. No friend answering their phone. No place that felt certain anymore. Every eye in the restaurant turned toward me. I felt it immediately. Curiosity. Concern. Confusion. A server took a hesitant step forward before stopping. The room seemed to hold its breath. I should have left. That was my first thought. Turn around. Walk back into the rain. Pretend none of this happened. Then I noticed the man standing near the center of the dining room. Tall. Calm. Perfectly still. He wore a charcoal suit without a single wrinkle. Silver light from the chandeliers caught the edge of his watch as he folded his hands in front of him. Ethan Callaway. Even I knew who he was. Everyone in the city did. Business owner. Investor. Philanthropist. The man who had built an empire while somehow remaining a mystery. He looked directly at me. Not at the stains. Not at the whispers spreading through the room. At me. Something about that made it harder to look away. A manager hurried toward him and quietly said something. Ethan listened for a moment before shaking his head once. Then he started walking in my direction. The entire restaurant seemed to grow quieter with every step. I wanted to explain. I wanted to tell him I was not causing trouble. That I had simply helped someone and gotten caught in the storm afterward. But the words stayed trapped somewhere behind my exhaustion. Ethan stopped several feet away. His expression remained calm. Controlled. Yet there was something else there too. Concern. Genuine concern. He glanced briefly toward the red stains on my sleeves and then back to my face. Are you hurt? He asked. The question surprised me. Not what happened. Not who I was. Not why I looked the way I did. Just a simple question. Are you hurt? I shook my head slowly. No. Relief flashed across his face before disappearing almost immediately. Then he turned toward the staff. His voice was quiet. So quiet that most people would have missed it. Yet every employee heard him instantly. Close the doors. The restaurant froze. No one argued. No one questioned him. Within seconds the entrance was secured. New guests were politely redirected. Conversation softened. The outside world disappeared behind glass and rain. Ethan looked back at me. You are safe here, he said. For simple words. I did not realize how badly I needed to hear them until that moment. Then his eyes drifted toward a silver bracelet on my wrist. His expression changed. Not fear. Not confusion. Recognition. He stared at it for several seconds before quietly speaking a name I had never heard before. Margaret Sinclair. The name hung in the air between us. Margaret Sinclair. I stared at Ethan, waiting for an explanation that did not come. Around us, the restaurant slowly returned to life, but the atmosphere had changed. Conversations remained quieter. Servers moved more carefully. It felt as though everyone understood something important had happened, even if they did not know what. Ethan's eyes remained fixed on the silver bracelet around my wrist. The expression on his face was impossible to read. Not shock. Not fear. Something deeper. Something personal. Finally, he looked away and motioned toward a private dining room near the back of the restaurant. "Come with me." Under normal circumstances, I probably would have refused. I had spent my entire life being cautious around strangers. Yet nothing about this night felt normal. Besides, Ethan had already done more for me in 10 minutes than most people had done in weeks. I followed him through the dining room. Warm light reflected across polished wood walls and framed black and white photographs. The private room overlooked the rain-soaked city through a wall of glass. Once the door closed behind us, the noise of the restaurant faded completely. Ethan pulled out a chair for me before taking a seat across the table. Neither of us spoke immediately. A staff member entered quietly with tea and fresh towels, then disappeared again without asking a single question. The efficiency was almost impressive. Ethan waited until the door closed before speaking. "Where did you get that bracelet?" His voice remained calm. Controlled. I looked down at the silver band resting against my wrist. The metal had faded slightly over the years, but I had never considered it unusual. "My mother gave it to me." Ethan leaned back slightly. "When?" "Before she passed away." Silence followed. Outside, rain slid down the glass in long silver lines. Ethan looked toward the city lights beyond the window. For the first time since meeting him, he seemed uncertain. "What was your mother's name?" I hesitated. The question felt strangely important. "Rebecca Brooks." Something shifted behind his eyes. Recognition. Not of my mother directly. Of something connected to her. He stood and crossed the room toward a small cabinet built into the wall. After unlocking it, he removed an old photograph inside a silver frame. When he returned to the table, he carefully placed it in front of me. My breath caught immediately. 3 women stood together beside a lakeside dock. One of them was unmistakably my mother. Younger. Smiling. Standing beside a woman I had never seen before. The third woman stood between them wearing the exact same bracelet hanging from my wrist. "That is Margaret Sinclair," Ethan said quietly. I looked back and forth between the photograph and the bracelet. My pulse accelerated. "How do you have this?" Ethan remained silent for several seconds. Then he pointed toward the woman standing beside Margaret. The woman I did not recognize. "Because that is my mother." The room suddenly felt smaller. Every question I thought I understood disappeared. I stared at the photograph. My mother. Margaret Sinclair. Ethan's mother. 3 lives connected decades before Ethan and I ever met. Then Ethan slowly reached into his jacket pocket and removed a folded piece of paper that looked impossibly old. His gaze settled on the bracelet one final time. "There is a reason Margaret wanted you to have that." He placed the paper on the table between us. Across the front, written in faded blue ink, were 6 words that immediately stole my breath. "For Rebecca's daughter. Open together." My eyes remained fixed on the folded paper lying between us. "For Rebecca's daughter. Open together." The word seemed impossible. My mother had never mentioned Margaret Sinclair. She had never mentioned Ethan's family either. Yet somehow a letter had been waiting for me long before I ever stepped inside this restaurant. Long before I even knew Ethan Calloway existed. Outside the private dining room, rain continued sliding down the glass walls overlooking the city. Inside, everything felt still. Quiet. As though time itself had slowed down to watch what happened next. Ethan carefully unfolded the paper and placed it flat on the table. The document was older than I expected. The edges had yellowed slightly. The ink had faded. Yet the handwriting remained clear. Elegant. Deliberate. We both leaned forward. My pulse quickened immediately when I recognized the signature at the bottom before reading a single sentence. Margaret Sinclair. The woman in the photograph. The woman wearing the bracelet. The woman whose name Ethan had spoken the moment he saw me. I swallowed hard and began reading. "If you are reading this letter, then Rebecca's daughter and Eleanor's son have finally met. Ethan and I exchanged a glance. Eleanor. His mother. Margaret somehow knew this day would happen. Or hoped it would. I continued. 22 years ago, 4 friends made a promise beside Silver Lake. We promised that if life ever separated us, the next generation would finish what we started. The room grew even quieter. My eyes moved across the page. Margaret described a lakeside project started by 4 close friends. Rebecca Brooks, Margaret Sinclair, Eleanor Calloway, and a man named Daniel Mercer. Together they purchased a small property near the lake. Their dream was simple. Create a retreat where struggling families could rest, heal, and begin again. Not a business. Not an investment. A refuge. Something meaningful. Something lasting. Then the letter changed. Circumstances changed. People moved away. Illness arrived unexpectedly. Life interrupted the future they imagined. Before the project could be completed, everything stopped. At least publicly. I paused. A strange sadness settled over me. Not because the dream had failed. Because it felt unfinished. The next paragraph caught Ethan's attention immediately. If Ethan and Rebecca's daughter are reading this together, then the bracelet found its way home. Home. The word echoed in my mind. Margaret explained that the bracelet had never been jewelry. It was a symbol shared between the 4 founders. A reminder of the promise they made beside the lake. My fingers instinctively touched the silver band around my wrist. Suddenly it felt different. More important. Ethan remained silent while I continued reading. The final section of the letter included directions. Not emotional reflections. Not memories. Directions. There is a wooden cabin at Silver Lake. Inside the fireplace, behind the center stone, you will find what remains of our project. Finish what we could not. My heart immediately began racing. Ethan looked down at the paper and slowly exhaled. Neither of us spoke for several moments. Finally I broke the silence. Silver Lake. Ethan nodded once. About 70 miles north of here. I looked toward the rain beyond the windows. The storm seemed lighter now. The city lights reflected softly through the glass. Everything felt connected somehow. The restaurant. The photograph. The bracelet. The letter. 22 years of unanswered questions leading toward one place. Ethan carefully folded the letter again. Then he reached into his wallet and removed an old photograph I had not seen before. 4 young people stood beside a lake. Smiling. Laughing. Holding shovels near the foundation of a small cabin. My mother stood among them. Then Ethan pointed toward the background of the picture. My breath caught instantly. Because hanging above the cabin door was the exact same symbol engraved on my silver bracelet. I could not stop looking at the photograph. 4 young people standing beside a half-finished cabin. My mother smiling beneath a bright summer sky. Ethan's mother standing beside her. Margaret Sinclair holding a shovel while Daniel Mercer pointed toward something outside the frame. It looked less like a project and more like a family. A family connected by choice rather than blood. The silver symbol above the cabin door matched the engraving on my bracelet perfectly. Every line. Every curve. Every detail. For years I had worn it without understanding what it meant. Now it felt as though the answer had been waiting for me all along. Ethan carefully returned the photograph to the table. Neither of us spoke immediately. Outside, the storm had begun to fade. Rain still tapped against the glass, but the city lights appeared brighter now. We should go there, I finally said. Ethan studied the picture for a moment before nodding. I was thinking the same thing. The certainty in his voice surprised me. He was not treating this like a mystery. He was treating it like a responsibility. As though he already knew there was something important waiting at Silver Lake. A few minutes later, Ethan stood and walked toward the window overlooking the restaurant. The dining room below had returned to its normal rhythm. Guests laughed softly over dinner. Servers carried trays between tables. Life continued as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Yet everything had changed for me. Ethan turned back toward me. "There is something you should know before we leave tomorrow." My attention immediately shifted toward him. His expression had grown serious again. "What is it?" He hesitated. That alone caught me off guard. Ethan Calloway did not seem like a man who hesitated often. Finally he spoke. "My mother visited Silver Lake every year until she died." I blinked. "Every year?" He nodded. "She never told me why." The answer created even more questions. If Eleanor had known about the cabin all these years, why had she never finished the project herself? Why wait? Why leave clues? Ethan seemed to be asking himself the same thing. He walked back to the table and picked up Margaret's letter once more. "There is another detail." He pointed toward a sentence near the bottom of the page. I leaned closer. The final instruction had been written separately from the rest of the letter. Almost as an afterthought. "Bring the key." My eyes widened. "What key?" Ethan's gaze settled on the photograph. Then on the bracelet around my wrist. "I do not know." Silence followed. We searched through the photograph again. The letter. Every detail. Every corner. Nothing looked like a key. Eventually I leaned back in my chair and sighed. My mind felt overwhelmed by clues, memories, and unanswered questions. Ethan noticed immediately. "You should eat something." I almost laughed. Food had not crossed my mind once all evening. Yet suddenly I realized how hungry I was. Ethan ordered dinner without asking what I wanted. Strangely, he chose exactly the meal I would have ordered myself. A simple grilled chicken plate, vegetables, and warm bread. Comfortable food. Familiar food. As we ate, conversation became easier. We talked about ordinary things for the first time. My work at the library. His favorite place near the lake. The books his mother used to read. The stories my mother loved. Piece by piece, the distance between stranger and friend began to disappear. Hours later, as the restaurant prepared to close, Ethan escorted me toward a guest suite located above the building. Before leaving, he handed me the framed photograph. "Keep it tonight." I looked down at the image. For smiling faces frozen in time. Then I noticed something I had missed earlier. Hanging around Margaret Sinclair's neck was a small chain. At the end of the chain rested a brass key. I barely slept that night. The photograph remained on the bedside table beside the lamp, illuminated by a soft circle of golden light. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same image. For young friends standing beside a cabin at Silver Lake. My mother smiling. Margaret Sinclair wearing the silver bracelet. And around her neck, the brass key that somehow felt more important than anything else in the picture. By sunrise, I was already dressed. The storm had passed completely. Pale morning light stretched across the city skyline outside the suite windows. For the first time in months, I felt something stronger than uncertainty. Purpose. A quiet knock sounded at the door. When I opened it, Ethan stood outside holding 2 cups of coffee. He looked as composed as ever. Dark jacket. Crisp white shirt. Calm eyes that somehow seemed less guarded than the night before. "Ready?" he asked. I accepted the coffee and smiled. "I think so." 2 hours later, we were heading north. The city slowly disappeared behind us as highways became country roads and country roads became winding lanes lined with pine trees. The farther we traveled, the more the landscape changed. Small towns appeared and vanished. Lakes shimmered beneath the morning sun. The world felt quieter here. Simpler somehow. Ethan drove while I studied the photograph again. Do you think the cabin is still standing? I asked. There is only one way to find out. His answer made me smile. Around noon, a wooden sign appeared beside the road. Silver Lake. My pulse immediately quickened. The lake itself came into view a few minutes later. Sunlight danced across the water. Tall pines surrounded the shoreline. It was beautiful in a way photographs could never fully capture. Peaceful. Timeless. We followed a narrow gravel road winding along the eastern shore. Eventually, Ethan slowed the vehicle. There. I looked ahead. My breath caught instantly. The cabin still stood. Smaller than I expected. Older too. But unmistakably the same building from the photograph. The symbol remained above the front door. Weathered by time, yet clearly visible. For several moments neither of us moved. 22 years of unanswered questions sat quietly at the end of that gravel path. Ethan finally opened his door. Let us see what they left behind. The wooden steps creaked softly beneath our feet as we approached. A small brass lock secured the front entrance. My heart sank slightly. We do not have the key. Ethan remained calm. Instead of reaching for the lock, he stepped closer to the symbol carved above the door. His expression changed immediately. Hannah. I looked up. A narrow groove had been carved directly beneath the symbol. The shape looked strangely familiar. Then realization hit me. Bracelet. My fingers trembled slightly as I removed the silver bracelet from my wrist. The engraving on the metal matched the carved symbol perfectly. Slowly, I pressed the bracelet into the groove. A faint click echoed from inside the door. Ethan and I exchanged stunned looks. The lock released instantly. For 22 years, the key had never been a key. It had been the bracelet all along. The front door opened inward. Dust floated through beams of sunlight pouring across the floor. The cabin smelled of aged wood and pine. Everything inside appeared untouched. A stone fireplace stood against the far wall exactly as Margaret described in her letter. We walked toward it together. My pulse pounded louder with every step. Then I noticed something resting on the mantel above the fireplace. A small framed note. Written in my mother's handwriting. Welcome back. The words on the mantel seemed to stop time itself. Welcome back. I stared at my mother's handwriting while sunlight streamed through the cabin windows. Dust floated gently through the golden beams. Everything felt untouched. Preserved. As though someone had carefully prepared this place and then simply stepped away, trusting that one day the right people would return. Ethan stood beside me studying the framed note. Neither of us spoke for several moments. There was something strangely emotional about seeing those two simple words. Not because I had ever been here before. Because somehow my mother believed I would. Slowly, I lifted the frame from the mantel. A second note rested beneath it. Smaller. Folded. My pulse immediately quickened. There is more. Ethan moved closer. Together we unfolded the paper. The handwriting belonged to Margaret Sinclair. If you found your way inside, then you already discovered the first lesson. The answer was never hidden. It was carried with you the entire time. Instinctively, my fingers touched the bracelet resting in my palm. Margaret was right. The key had been with me for years. The next instruction directed us toward the fireplace. Behind the center stone. Exactly as the original letter described. We crossed the cabin together. The stone fireplace dominated the room. Weathered but solid. Carefully, Ethan examined the center stone while I searched for anything unusual. Then he found it. A narrow groove along the edge. Hidden unless someone knew where to look. Together we eased the stone forward. It moved surprisingly easily. A small compartment appeared behind it. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it. Inside rested a wooden box. Nothing more. No treasure. No dramatic secret. Just a simple cedar box sealed with a brass clasp. Ethan lifted it carefully and placed it on a nearby table. Sunlight spilled across the lid. The same symbol from the bracelet had been carved into the wood. For a moment neither of us moved. 22 years of mystery sat directly in front of us. Finally I opened it. The scent of aged paper drifted into the room. The box contained journals, photographs, letters, and several leather-bound folders. At the very top rested a document titled Silver Lake Family Initiative. I looked at Ethan. He seemed just as surprised as I was. We opened the folder together. Inside were plans. Detailed plans. Architectural drawings. Budgets. Scholarship programs. Community outreach projects. Housing assistance initiatives. Everything the four friends dreamed of building had been documented. Not abandoned. Preserved. Waiting. Page after page revealed the same vision. A non-profit retreat where struggling families could recover, learn new skills, and rebuild their lives. The dream had been far larger than either of us imagined. Then I found another letter tucked inside the final folder. This one belonged to my mother. Dear Hannah. If you are reading this, then the dream survived. Tears immediately filled my eyes. Ethan quietly stepped back, giving me space while remaining close enough that I never felt alone. I continued reading. The world will always need more buildings. More businesses. More money. What it truly needs are people willing to care about strangers. That is what Silver Lake was always meant to become. A place where kindness could multiply. I wiped my eyes and continued. The final paragraph felt almost impossible. If you choose to continue this work, you will not be doing it alone. 4 signatures appeared beneath the letter. Rebecca Brooks. Margaret Sinclair. Eleanor Calloway. Daniel Mercer. Then beneath them was a 5th signature added years later in different ink. My breath caught immediately. Anthony Calloway. Ethan's father. Ethan slowly lowered himself into a chair. For the first time since I met him, he looked genuinely overwhelmed. Because this was no longer only my inheritance. It belonged to both of us. For several minutes neither of us spoke. The cabin felt different now. Smaller somehow. More personal. The mystery that had drawn us here was beginning to transform into something else. Responsibility. Purpose. Legacy. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows overlooking Silver Lake, illuminating the folders spread across the wooden table. Decades of plans rested before us. Not forgotten dreams. Deferred dreams. Waiting for the right people to continue them. Ethan remained seated, studying the final signature. His father's name. Anthony Calloway. I could see memories moving behind his eyes. Questions he had probably never thought to ask. Answers arriving years too late. Eventually he picked up another folder from the cedar box. There is more. His voice sounded quieter than usual. We opened the folder together. Inside were progress reports, handwritten notes, and photographs documenting the early stages of the Silver Lake Family Initiative. Families gathered around picnic tables. Children fishing from the dock. Volunteers painting cabins. Community events filled with laughter and sunlight. The place had not simply existed on paper. It had briefly become real. My chest tightened as I turned another page. They actually did it. Ethan nodded. For a while. Then we found the report explaining why everything stopped. Rising costs. Economic changes. Health concerns affecting several founders. One challenge after another. Nothing dramatic. Nothing tragic. Just life. The same force that quietly changes even the best plans. Yet what struck me most was what happened next. The final reports never described failure. Instead they described preservation. They documented how the founders intentionally protected the property, maintained ownership, and stored every record for the future. They never gave up. They simply ran out of time. I looked around the cabin. Suddenly everything made sense. The letters. The bracelet. The hidden compartment. The careful instructions. They had been preparing a bridge across generations. Ethan discovered another envelope tucked beneath the reports. This one carried both our names. Hannah and Ethan. My pulse immediately accelerated. The handwriting belonged to Eleanor Calloway. Ethan carefully opened it. We read together. If you found this letter, then Silver Lake has chosen its next caretakers. The phrase sounded unusual. Almost poetic. Yet strangely fitting. Eleanor explained that every founder believed certain places carried purpose beyond buildings and land. Silver Lake was one of those places. A refuge built on kindness rather than ownership. The letter continued. Do not rebuild what we imagined. Build what your generation needs. Ethan looked up first. I could tell the sentence affected him as much as it affected me. The founders were not asking us to copy the past. They were giving us permission to create the future. For the first time since arriving, the responsibility felt lighter. More hopeful. We spent the rest of the afternoon exploring the property. Several smaller cabins still stood among the trees. A lakeside pavilion overlooked the water. Walking paths wound through the forest. Everywhere we looked, evidence of the original vision remained. By sunset we found ourselves sitting on the old dock shown in the photographs. The lake reflected shades of gold and orange beneath the evening sky. Silence settled comfortably between us. Not awkward. Familiar. Finally Ethan spoke. You know what surprises me most? I turned toward him. What? A small smile appeared. The fact that none of this started because we were looking for it. I laughed softly. He was right. I had walked into his restaurant by accident. He had noticed a bracelet by accident. Every step afterward felt impossible to predict. Yet somehow it all led here. Then Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and handed me a folded document he had quietly taken from the cedar box earlier. Across the top were 4 words that instantly captured my attention. Phase 2 Development Proposal. The document felt surprisingly heavy for only a few pages. Phase 2 Development Proposal. I stared at the title while the last light of day reflected across Silver Lake. Ethan remained seated beside me on the dock. The water moved gently beneath the fading sunset. Everything around us felt peaceful, yet my pulse immediately quickened. Every clue we had discovered so far seemed connected to the past. This was different. This pointed toward the future. Slowly, I opened the folder. The first page contained a date. 7 years ago. Much newer than anything else we had found. Ethan leaned closer. Someone came back here. I nodded. The proposal outlined plans to restore the property and expand its original mission. Updated housing programs. Family counseling services. Scholarship funding. Career training workshops. The vision felt remarkably modern. Someone had taken the founder's dream and adapted it for a new generation. Then I noticed the signature at the bottom of the first page. Eleanor Calloway. Ethan immediately sat upright. My mother never mentioned this. We continued reading. Eleanor explained that she had quietly spent years preparing the next stage of the project. Not because she expected to complete it herself. Because she believed the next generation eventually would. The realization settled over both of us at the same time. None of this had been accidental. The letters. The preserved records. The maintained property. The hidden compartment. They were not relics. They were preparations. Then another envelope slipped from the folder. Smaller than the others. Sealed with dark blue wax bearing the familiar symbol from the bracelet. Across the front were 4 words. Open when you understand. Ethan laughed softly. Your mother and my mother really loved instructions. I smiled despite myself. Carefully, I broke the seal. Inside rested a single handwritten page. The handwriting belonged to Eleanor. If you open this letter, then you finally understand what Silver Lake was never about. I continued reading. Buildings decay. Plans change. Money comes and goes. What survives is the willingness to help someone when there is no reward for doing so. My chest tightened. The words immediately brought me back to the beginning. The rain. The restaurant. The moment Ethan chose to help a stranger. Eleanor continued. The project was never the cabins. The project was always the people. Tears blurred my vision slightly. The simplicity of the message made it even more powerful. All this time we had been searching for hidden answers. Yet the truth had been sitting in front of us from the beginning. Kindness. Service. Connection. Ethan remained quiet while I finished the letter. The final paragraph carried one last surprise. Tomorrow morning, visit the boathouse. The final piece waits there. I lowered the paper slowly. Ethan looked toward the far shoreline. In the distance, partially hidden among tall pines, a small boathouse stood near the water's edge. Neither of us had noticed it earlier. One final piece, he said quietly. The sky deepened into shades of purple and gold. Evening settled across the lake. We returned to the cabin and spent hours reviewing documents, photographs, and journals. Every page strengthened the same feeling. We were not inheriting a mystery. We were inheriting a mission. Much later, after darkness covered the lake, I stepped outside onto the porch alone. Stars reflected across the calm water. The air smelled of pine and cedar. For the first time in a very long time, I felt completely certain about something. Then the cabin door opened behind me. Ethan stepped outside carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He handed one to me without speaking. We stood side by side overlooking the lake. Comfortable silence stretched between us. Finally, he glanced toward the distant boathouse. Do you think they saved the best secret for last? I followed his gaze. Moonlight reflected across the water toward the small structure hidden among the trees. Somehow, deep down, I already knew the answer. Yes. The next morning arrived bright and clear. Sunlight stretched across Silver Lake, turning the water into a sheet of gold. For the first time since arriving, there were no storms. No shadows. Just quiet certainty. Ethan and I walked toward the boathouse shortly after sunrise. The path wound through tall pines and wild grass sparkling with morning dew. Everything felt different now. Not because the mystery was ending. Because I finally understood what it had always been about. The boathouse stood at the edge of the lake exactly where we had seen it the night before. Weathered wood. Faded paint. A place most people would walk past without a second glance. Yet every step toward it felt important. When we reached the door, I noticed the familiar symbol carved above the entrance. The same symbol from the bracelet. The same symbol from the cabin. The same symbol connecting every piece of this story. Ethan pushed the door open. Sunlight streamed through narrow windows inside. The room was nearly empty. A small wooden boat rested against one wall. Fishing equipment sat neatly arranged in the corner. At first glance, there appeared to be nothing unusual. Then I saw it. A single table positioned beneath the center window. Resting on top was a wooden box. No locks. No hidden compartments. Just a simple box waiting in plain sight. We approached together. My hands trembled slightly as I lifted the lid. Inside were 2 envelopes and a leather journal. One envelope carried my name. The other carried Ethan's. We exchanged a glance before opening them. Mine contained a short handwritten letter from my mother. Hannah. If you are reading this, then you discovered what matters most. Not the property. Not the plans. Not even the dream itself. People are the real inheritance. I smiled through sudden tears. The message felt familiar now. Every clue had pointed toward the same truth. Ethan unfolded his letter quietly. As he read, a soft smile appeared. My father said almost the same thing. We sat beside each other and opened the journal. The first pages contained entries from all 4 founders. Rebecca, Margaret, Eleanor, Daniel. Each wrote about why Silver Lake mattered to them. Not because they wanted recognition. Because they believed everyone deserves a place where hope can begin again. Then near the final pages, we found the last entry. It had been written only a few years earlier by Eleanor. If Hannah and Ethan are reading this together, then our work is finished. Yours is beginning. Below the sentence rested a folded document. We opened it carefully. It transferred ownership of Silver Lake Family Initiative into a new nonprofit trust. Co-directors, Hannah Brooks and Ethan Calloway. I stared at the page. Then at Ethan. Then back at the page again. The founders had not simply left us a mission. They had left us a future. Hours later, we stood on the dock overlooking the lake. The same dock from the photographs. The same water that had witnessed every promise made before us. Volunteers would arrive next month. Restoration would begin soon afterward. The project would finally continue. Not exactly as the founders imagined. Better. Adapted for a new generation, just as Eleanor requested. A gentle breeze moved across the water. I looked down at the silver bracelet resting on my wrist. The object that started everything. Then I thought about the night I walked into Ethan's restaurant exhausted, frightened, and completely lost. One decision had changed everything. Ethan followed my gaze toward the lake. Do you ever think about how close we came to missing all of this? I smiled. Every day. He laughed softly. The sound carried across the water. For a moment we simply stood there, watching sunlight dance across the lake. Then I finally understood something my mother had been trying to teach me my entire life. The people who change your future rarely arrive with answers. Sometimes they simply open a door when you need one most. And sometimes, if you are very lucky, they stay long enough to help you build something beautiful on the other side.